You know, we're always told that building wealth is all about saving more and working harder. But when you really look at how the top 1% are operating, especially as we look ahead to 2026, the playbook looks, well, completely different. So let's break down what's actually in it.
So what's the real difference maker? If the traditional path, a good job, diligent saving, some stock market investing, isn't the whole story anymore, then what is? Well, the answer seems to be a framework that's way less about just passively collecting assets and a lot more about active, intentional design.
The thing is, the entire economic landscape has shifted under our feet. Those straightforward strategies that worked for our parents or grandparents in the 20th century, they just don't cut it anymore. The new playbook, it seems, is less about playing the game and more about designing the board itself.
And this is where we get to the core idea. It's a concept called hyperagency. This is the fundamental shift. It's moving from being a passenger in the economy to becoming the actual architect of your own financial reality. It's all about taking intentional control.
So where does this all begin?
You might be surprised to hear it doesn't start with money. It starts with the mind. The very first pillar is building what's called a cognitive fortress, and its whole purpose is to protect what they see as their number one asset, the ability to make clear decisions.
Okay, so this is where things get really counterintuitive. The system basically rejects a concept we all live by: time management. The conventional approach is all about cramming more into your day, right? But the 1% system is focused on energy management. It's not about how many hours you clock in, it's about the quality of your thinking during your best hours. They fiercely protect this time for what they call invisible work, things like strategy and deep thinking, which ends up creating way more value than just being busy.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? In this new model, a calendar packed with meetings isn't a status symbol. It's actually seen as a liability. It's a sign that someone else is in control of your most precious resources, your time and your focus.
So how do they actually build this fortress? Well, it seems to boil down to a few key habits. First, prioritizing that invisible work, the deep thinking we talked about. Second, making no their default answer to protect their energy. They also actively curate their information intake, choosing specialized intelligence over just scrolling through reactive news feeds. And finally, they use something called emotional audits, basically a system to make sure that major decisions are driven by cool logic, not by temporary feelings like fear or greed.
Okay, so once that mental fortress is secure, we move to the second pillar, the financial playbook itself. This is where capital gets deployed with, let's say, surgical precision, and often in ways that completely defy conventional advice. All right, this is a big one, the debt paradox. While most of us are taught to fear debt and pay it off as fast as possible, the wealthy use what's called strategic leverage. They see debt as a powerful tool. It lets them get cash without selling their best assets, which of course would trigger a huge tax bill.
And this strategy is famously known as buy, borrow, die. It's a pretty simple three-step process. First, you buy assets that grow in value, like real estate or stocks. Second, instead of selling them to get cash, you borrow against them. That's a tax-free move. All the while, your assets just keep growing. And finally, you die. The assets then get passed to your heirs with something called a step-up in basis, which legally wipes out the tax on all that growth, forever.
We're also seeing another huge pivot here, away from passive investing. For years, the smart move was to just buy an S&P 500 index fund and call it a day. But in today's kind of K-shaped market, where you've got clear winners and, well, clear losers, the 1% have shifted back to active management. They're hunting for specific winners and sometimes even betting against the losers.
And just take a look at this table. It shows you exactly how radical this shift is. On the left, you've got a classic 60-40 portfolio. On the right, this endowment model. Look at what happens to public stocks and bonds. They've been slashed, and all that money has moved into places like private credit, which is kind of like being the bank for private companies, and private equity, where you own pieces of those companies. These are markets where they believe they can actively generate much higher returns.
All right, this takes us to our third and, honestly, most futuristic pillar, building a defensive moat around the future, using technology and biology. This is really where hyperagency goes beyond just finance and into life itself.
You know, for most of us, AI is something like ChatGPT, right? A tool to help write an email. But for the 1%, it's becoming a core piece of their entire operational infrastructure. They're using what's called agentic AI. Think of it less like a calculator and more like a personal CFO that works 24/7, an autonomous system that doesn't just give you advice, but can actually manage and protect your wealth. For example, these AI systems can automatically optimize cash flow to maximize yield or scan global markets for super-specific investment opportunities a human could never find. And on the defensive side, it's not just about passwords anymore. We're talking AI-powered cybersecurity that can spot fraud just based on the way you type. And what's wild is that this defensive thinking doesn't stop at their bank accounts. It extends to their own bodies. Longevity medicine isn't about vanity. It's treated like critical asset management, using advanced diagnostics to catch health risks years before they become a real problem.
And to give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, it's just staggering. The market for this kind of longevity tech is projected to hit $64 billion by 2026, and pretty much all of that spending is being driven by this elite group who see their own biology as the ultimate investment.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. What does this whole mindset actually look like out in the world? Well, it seems to have completely changed the definition of what status and success even mean.
This table, I think, perfectly captures this total flip. The old status symbols are out. Logomania is being replaced by quiet luxury. Things that signal taste without screaming the price tag. The whole public performance of hustle culture is giving way to time sovereignty, which is the real luxury of controlling your own schedule. Public fame is now seen as a liability. It's being traded for anonymity and privacy. And even the assets are different. A flashy car just isn't the symbol of freedom it used to be. You know what is? A second passport, which offers true global mobility.
Because at the end of the day, the goal itself has shifted. It's not about just piling up the most money anymore. It's about achieving the highest possible degree of personal sovereignty. That means freedom over your time, your location, and your own peace of mind.
And really, if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. The conventional path is all about optimizing your effort, working harder, longer, and smarter inside the existing system. The 1% strategy is about optimizing your positioning. It's about designing the system itself so that it works for you, whether you're actively working or not.
So, this brings us to the final question. Look, the takeaway here isn't that you need to go out and try to buy a second passport or get into private equity. It's about looking at this whole operating system and asking yourself, which of these mindsets, these habits of intentional design, could you actually adapt to your own life? Because the gap between the 1% and everyone else, it's not just a financial one anymore. It's become a behavioral one.